everybody. Welcome to another episode of Word Slingers. Today we have a special guest, Pete Simeti.
Hey, how's it going?
How's it going, Pete?
It's going good. How are you?
Pretty good. Hot. It's hot out here in Oklahoma.
Ooh, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's the temperature like out there?
So for the past, I want to say like 20 days, it's been over 100 degrees.
Wow.
We got
You said 20 days?
for the past 20 days. Yeah, it's
Wow.
got a good stretch.
Man, oh man. Yeah, it's been approaching 100 here for about a week straight, and I'm in New Hampshire. But
Wow.
that's a little bit. I mean, these things happen. Is this unnormal for you to have weather like that in the summer?
Not unnormal, just unnormal to have it that consecutive days, like that many consecutive days in a row.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Goodness gracious. Do you have air conditioning?
Do you have air conditioning? It's working full
Good.
time right now.
Good.
Yeah, overtime.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. But goodness gracious, yeah,
Yeah.
that sounds kind of oppressive with the heat.
It
Man,
really
oh man.
is. Yeah. All right, so let's talk about writing comic books. What
Sure.
got you into writing?
I don't know. I've always been reading comics as long as I can remember. So I think that's kind of what got me into writing, especially comics. But I would honestly, I feel a little bit, I don't know, and I probably shouldn't feel this way, but I feel a little bit odd calling myself like a comic book writer, even though I have written comics and I have written comic stories. I think it's because primarily for so long I've been a publisher.
Right.
Because even when people refer to me as an artist or as anything else, because I have done and can do pretty much anything in comics, but it's primarily just publishing for years and years. Now I'm getting back in the saddle with writing again. But yeah, I think reading really spurned me to want to be a writer and then make my own stories.
Cool. Was there any book in particular that inspired you?
Not like a specific book, no, just kind of all the ones that I had read, and then just even all kinds of stories, whether it was, and not just comics either, but all kinds of stories, whether it was film, TV, novels, whatever, everything. I loved stories when I was a kid. Every kid loves stories, though, so that's kind of
Yeah.
obvious to say that. But I really loved when I was a kid. I really loved scary stories to tell in the dark.
Cool.
So that really was my first, I think my first exposure as a kid into reading something that felt like maybe I shouldn't be reading this. It scared the crap out of me, but I
Right.
loved it. And I would say probably I was around maybe 7 or 8 when I started reading those. And then later on as a kid, I was reading like the Goosebumps series. I was always drawn to horror and sci-fi and things like that. But it was either that kind of stuff, comic books, or all the weird like Time Life books about like pyramids, UFOs, Bigfoot, Bermuda Triangle, like
Right.
everything like that. I couldn't get enough of it. So I think it was between all that supernatural stuff. I loved anything about outer space, planets, stars, all that kind of stuff too. I was always interested in anything sci-fi, anything horror, fantasy, all that kind of stuff. So it's not anything particular. It was just kind of everything. And then one day, it's just the more you read, I think, and you're exposed to stories and storytelling, I think the more you want to start kind of telling your own stories. It starts spurning the imagination. At least that's what
Yeah.
it did for me. So it wasn't any one particular book. It was just a culmination of all of them.
Okay. So, what was the first thing you've ever written? Was it a comic book or was it something else?
The first thing I ever written. I mean, how technical do you want to be? Do you want to say the first thing I ever wrote that I earned money on?
No, no, not even that. Just something you did for fun that you said, "I've got this idea and I need to get it out." What was that?
Probably short stories when I was a kid. I would always write like fantasy type short stories, and I was more drawn towards like heroic fantasy when I was a
Okay.
kid, and then poetry, songwriting. I was in a band for a couple of years. I mean, you couldn't tell by looking at me. This guy looks like he never was in a band.
Yeah. No.
So I was in a band for about 5 or 6 years or so, and had music out there and wrote my own songs and things like that. But comic book wise, I mean, I was always making comics too when I was a kid. just very active with worlds of fiction and things like that, which was always all funny to me too, because I had a best friend who was really into sports, and we always played sports too.
Yeah.
We were always into hockey and baseball and basketball. But as far as what I like to consider professional writing in terms of I actually earned money on it, it would definitely, I guess I could say it was music, because we got paid. We got paid
Yeah.
for gigs. We sold CDs and things like that. But my first comic that ever came out, that was probably, I would have to say, probably Spectrum, which was a really horrible first two issues, but they spurned Alterna. They created Alterna from that.
Right.
And I created Alterna basically as a self-publishing label, more or less. And I didn't really think it would be around longer than a couple of years, and just mostly just for me. So I didn't give it too much thought the first year or so, and then I started getting submissions in, and then it became a publisher over time. But that was like 16 years ago. But yeah,
Wow.
it was Spectrum. It was a really horrible series. I sold maybe like 200 copies. But I knew it was horrible. I knew I wasn't ready yet. I knew I was just starting out, and I knew I was lucky enough to just kind of test the waters, get this made, kind of have a trial by fire in a way, and then hopefully, learn what to do next. And I learned a lot from making those first two issues. Issue two better than issue one, which is great.
Yeah.
It's good to not go in reverse. But yeah, it would probably be that. And it was kind of trippy selling out of my first two issues of a series. But then after that, I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. This is crazy. I like writing it. I
Yeah.
like doing a cover. I did not like doing sequential art. I don't have the patience for it. And so, especially at that time, maybe now, I don't know, maybe it'd be different. But at that point in time, there was no way. But now, even if I did enjoy it, I don't have the time to do it with everything else going on. So I'd rather just write issues and hire someone else to do the art, who's obviously going to be way better than me at it. And it's fun that way, because then
Right.
I'm getting like a present every time they send me something. But yeah, it was a great learning experience. So I don't regret making my issues. I don't regret how they came out. But yeah, that was my first paid writing.
Well, that's awesome though. 200 issues that you sold. I mean, that's nothing to sneeze at. That's
Yeah, yeah. It was mostly just, it was funny. It was going to conventions, a couple local shops for signings, and then I sold maybe like 30 or so, doing a talk at my college
okay.
after I had graduated, and I was just kind of talking about making my own stuff and things like that, and they were into it. And they kind of liked it. So it was. I look at it now though. If the submission came through today, I'd be nice, but and try to give words of encouragement. But this would be someone I could look at and go, "This is." They need 5 to 10 more years of work, which is 100% honest, and that's why I also like what I'm doing now, where it's so far after that. Because my next book was The Chair, and then I just wrote that, and I inked it and lettered it, but someone else had drawn it, and that was maybe 2006 when that came out, and Spectrum was
Okay.
2005. And then that just came out in like a print on demand thing, and then it was a graphic novel that was mass distributed in 2008. So I had learned a lot in that course of time, and I had done a lot of work for other people too, some of it for free. And people kind of look down on that, but I always looked at it as I'm working for experience, not for
Yeah.
exposure. So I knew I had to kind of get better if I wanted to get paid. I couldn't go in there, just do complete shit work and say, well, I want $30 a page or $100 a page or
Right.
whatever. And then they say, okay, well, what do you have to show me that says that I should pay you that? And I'd go, nothing. But I mean, I'm doing stuff,
Right.
so I should get paid. It's a different experience than it is to just, get a part-time job or whatever, and you show up and you start working an hourly wage when you don't really know a whole lot to do on the job. It's a whole different market, a whole different concept. But yeah, I never look at it as work for exposure. I wasn't. I could care less if this was 1,000 people reading it, or 100 people, or one person, or nobody. I knew I needed more work to get better at what I wanted to do. So that's the value that I thought was there. And if anything, I thought it really helped. I thought it helped a lot, getting able to be better at those kind of things and learn as much as I could about making comics and every aspect of making comics.
racking up the experience points.
Yeah, you have to, and even if you don't want to, I mean, you definitely got to then go and try to become a master in something that's a little bit more where you feel, okay, I'm better at that. I enjoy doing this. That really helps.
Yeah.
If you're kind of a jack of all trades, master of none in a field like art, you'll get work, but you'll never really build anything. So you really gotta make sure that you start to, okay, I'm honing in on this. But yeah, with me, I felt like, okay, I want to know everything about everything, and this way I'm able to help out when needed. And if anything, it helps out with Alterna a lot, because when there's certain situations where lettering needs adjusted, or I need to provide a critique, or I need to help out with inking or the coloring or something like that, and just do touch-ups here or there, and know what to do, I can competently do that without especially giving a critique. If I'm giving a critique or feedback to another creator and I have no idea what to say other than it just doesn't look good, like that's not
Right.
very helpful. And I'm not so sure how seriously they would want to work with me. Continue to do that. So it helps to be able to actually understand what you're talking about and address it in a succinct manner. But yeah, I learned all that from essentially working for free, and then eventually you charge a page rate. And I always feel like I started charging a page rate when people started to seek me out, and when I started getting too much work at my plate. And I said, okay, well, now I can start charging, because then I can start saying I want this much for this much, and some people will pay that, some people won't, some people will
Right.
have certain budgets in mind, and then you start being able to get more and more money with more and more experience. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with people working for free. You just have to
Right.
be understanding of, you're either going to work for free for yourself, or you're going to work for free for someone else. But you do have to work for free at first. You have to build up
Very
a
true.
portfolio, you have to get experience.
Yeah, definitely. So going back to your first comic books, what were they about?
They were about, well, the Spectrum was like a crime mixed with sci-fi and a little bit of, I guess, realistic horror. At least I didn't get there yet, but the whole series had started off with this scientist, and he had created some suit that helps paralyze people to walk, but the suit bonds with your skin, and it's like nanotech. And essentially, what happened is that the corrupt person he was working for, he kind of comes in, he takes over the project, he kills off the scientists that are involved, including the guy who goes on to become Spectrum, or at least he thought he killed them off, and the suit bonds and grafts to his skin permanently. And now with it, he's able to do these super powered type things. He's able to kind of have, there was some kind of the suit is it's kind of invisible in a way, so you could still see the person's skin and whatever. And I made it so that it kind of, by bonding and grafting to his skin, he was able to kind of get invisible or shapeshift or these other things. But it was I thought it was a fun concept. I still think it's a
It
fun
is.
concept, but it was just not for me in terms of wanting to do that kind of story. And some people have asked me when I've pitched it and explained it, they say, "Oh, you should go back to that." And it's just, that's just not the story for me to tell at this point. And it wasn't a story. It was a story I thought, okay, let me do something that's like sort of something I don't think is around.
Right.
It wasn't really a story that I really wanted to tell. Felt like I could tell it for a long time. Was really passionate about it. That's King Cryptid is pretty much that story for me. But the chair was also that book was a psychological horror thriller on death row, and it centered around an inmate. And essentially, you didn't know if this inmate was innocent, guilty, whatever it was. He tells you he's innocent. They all tell you that they're
Right.
innocent. And as the story unfolds, it's more about a character study between two people who came from the same place and end up at the same place, but they went completely separate lives. And kind of just a theme on fate and things like that, and themes of capital punishment and all kinds of different ambiguous morality and kind of questioning things, and building up different horror and kind of suspense themes too. And that was a story I wanted to tell. I figured, okay, it'd be kind of cool to have a story that ends a certain way and certain characters that do certain things, but is a finite story. It's just really a graphic novel kind of story. People have asked for a sequel or a prequel, and that's not in the cards for it. I felt like that would
Yeah.
ruin the story in itself. It kind of like the way that if you watch the Star Wars prequels, when Vader's like, "I am your father," you're like, "I've known for like 4 movies now."
Right.
it's not a it's not a big deal. So it's just all these kinds of things. That they're brother sister. So it kind of ruins all these moments that are nice reveals and kind of go, oh wow, within the plot.
Yeah.
But yeah, to do that kind of a thing, I felt like, no, that's not what I want to do. I want to just tell this story and that's it, and leave it alone. But King Cryptid is a story that I want to tell for forever. It's about his adventures. It's about the paranormal. It's about all the different occurrences, the supernatural events that occur within the New England area, especially New Hampshire. But we leave the New England area too every now and then. And with the character being 500 or so years old, I'm going to have flashback issues and all kinds of other stuff. So it's a story that merges everything I've ever loved about anything. So the paranormal, the unknown, comics, sci-fi, horror, fantasy, it merges every type of story that I've always loved. And I'm able to do that now with this series. So I'm really excited about that.
That's awesome. Going back to the chair, I know you guys did a movie, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's
Did you write that, or did someone else write that?
Yeah, well, okay. So what's interesting about that is Erin, my wife. She basically edited the graphic novel years ago, and she wrote the screenplay to the film
Cool.
and kind of beefed it up a bit. Made certain characters actually not just be like one-dimensional caricatures.
Yeah.
Gave certain characters more time. Built up a backstory that was better for the flashbacks, and I kind of I I got a story credit because I came up with the story, but she did the screenplay and she added some extra cool stuff to it. And then they had filmed it, and I'd say that they probably ended up using and being truthful to about 70% of the script, which was a
Okay.
little disappointing.
Yeah.
But and it would be one thing if they would tell you, right? But they don't really. They just go with it,
Mm.
and then they say, "Oh, well, this we're just trying it out," and then you see it in the final, and you're like, "I wasn't really in the script though."
Right.
So movie making for me, it was exciting to cast the film. I did that, and reached out to actors, talked to agents. Casting Roddy Piper in the film was fantastic. Getting to know Roddy over that course of time, it was great. It was his last feature film before he had unexpectedly passed away. Um, but it was a fun experience getting to do that and getting to kind of we all play pretend when we're making stories, and they
Yeah.
hit a certain point and you're like, if this was a film, I would cast this person and that
Yeah.
person. And I got to do that for real, so that was kind of fun.
That's
uh,
awesome.
yeah, but so that was the best part about that, and getting able to actually put that out there and do that. But again, it was another learning experience. It taught me, if someone wants to make a movie on anything I've done, give me the check, put a lot of extra zeros after the first number,
Right.
and I'll just walk away. Because I'd rather make comics, just give me. I'll have the rights till they just keep making my comic, and you do the movie thing. I don't want to be involved with making the movie. I want to
Right.
just make comics.
It's awesome. Still, that's got to be a great experience.
Yeah, yeah, it was definitely an experience. It's like when it's happening, you hate every second of it because it's nerve wracking, it's
Yeah.
stressful. Especially like they were out in California filming, and I'm on the East Coast, so it'd always be a 3 hour time difference. They'd be done filming sometime at midnight. I'd have to talk to them at 3 to 4 in the morning. I honestly think that's what led to the fact that that's my schedule now for when I sleep. I don't really like go to sleep until like 5 in the morning.
Wow.
So it was just doing that for so long, almost a year. Back in, I want to say like 2014, 2015, something like that. 2015 sounds kind of right. So yeah, doing that for so long, it was just grueling, and it's just kind of, now I'm on West Coast time, I guess. But it was an experience. It definitely was, and I'm sure when I'm much older, I'll look back and be like, at least I did it,
Yeah.
that kind of a thing. So
Yeah. bucket list check off. Just,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, something and I'll never have to regret not doing it. I'll never have to think, well, what if we didn't do it? What could have been? And it honestly, the comic is still more popular than the film, so that says a lot too.
yeah,
And it's not that people don't like the film when they watch it. A lot of people have really actually enjoyed it, but it's still one of those things that people gravitate more towards the comic. I don't know if it's the story plays out better in the comic or whatever it may be, but it's really interesting how that works out. I think it's the same thing though with all these movies and comic stuff that we see nowadays. I mean, the movies, they'll come and go, people will enjoy them, but at the end of the day, if you were a comic fan before you saw that movie, you're still gonna be a comic fan. And
right,
there's decades of the comics to read as opposed to a couple of movies, and some are good, some are not good, and then that's kind of it. But
gotcha.
yeah.
Yeah, so with King Cryptid, this is your first series. So Spectrum was 2 issues. The Chair was graphic novel. What's the difference in approach to writing a series versus graphic novel or your 2 issue?
Yeah, well, for me anyway, and I know some people it's different. The A self-contained type story, I view it more as like that's a film and like a graphic novel, and then a series is more like a TV show where it's episodic. So my approach more for an episodic series is kind of a mix of character driven and plot driven. Certain issues are more character driven and more about the character and development and things like that, and then certain issues are more plot driven where you've established the character and then you can just have put them in a plot. So the Chair was definitely more plot driven. There's some character development there, but it's mostly about the plot. It's mostly about the twists and turns in the plot, setting up the characters down a series of events, and then that's how the story plays out. Something like that, I had come up with the ending first before I came up with the beginning. But with an ongoing series like King Cryptid, to me, the ending isn't something crazy like King Cryptid dies or anything like that. To me, the ending is very similar to the ending of like the '89 Tim Burton movie, where Batman is just kind of standing over the city.
Yeah,
It's just kind of like this heroic feeling. Oh, he's there watching over us, and it's like King Cryptid, standing at the top of the mountain, kind of surveying over the forest. That kind of a thing. So it's not really about coming up with the ending and coming up with a huge arc to expand on different events. It's about knowing the events that are going to play out and having that world building in there, but also having a lot of that character building. And then every issue is about, and we don't see a lot of that nowadays in comics, unfortunately, but every issue is very old school. Every issue is more about a plot and something that's occurring, and the characters are basically thrust in it. But like I said, there's still going to be issues that are more about character building and things like that, getting to know the characters, their personalities, their histories. And so yeah, I would say that definitely the difference between the two is one is far more about the plot and one is more about the characters. So for me, King Cryptid, I would say it's like 51 character driven, 49 plot driven, and then like the Chair was like 80-20. It was like 80% plot driven and 20% character driven.
it's cool. Cool. Hey, there's my brother. Hey, Justin.
Hey,
What's up, dudes? All right. So, what sparked the idea for King Cryptid?
um, is nothing necessarily in particular. It was more about wanting to make a series that was that I thought I would have a lot of fun with, and that I thought because I love character design and I love monsters and creatures and the unknown and things like that. And I know I wanted to do a series that was like that. I didn't really want to do a series that was centered around people. Even though there's lots of people in King Cryptid, I didn't want it to be the main character was a person necessarily, and there's a lot of just people in costumes or whatever. I wanted to do something that was very visually interesting, and mostly in a selfish way, mostly just for me to look at something from the artists and think, oh, that's so awesome. It's something that you haven't seen. You can only really do so much with a person and giving them a costume and things like that. But creatures, it's like you could disguise the limit. So when it came to that, I was kind of planning it back in, I want to say maybe 2018, 2019. But it was one of those if I ever get the chance, because I didn't know if I ever would. So I was putting Easter eggs of these monsters on the covers of It Came Out on a Wednesday whenever I had a chance to draw one. So It Came Out on a Wednesday number 7 actually features the character called the Granite Beast. And then number 15 is a character called Brug the Swamp Monster. And both of them are monsters in King Cryptid series. But at the time, I didn't know what they would be. I knew that I wanted to use them eventually for something. So coming up with the character of King Cryptid himself, it was more about something that struck as both it could exist as a cryptid in the real world, and what would you call it, and what would it look like. And with cryptids, it's usually you're seeing something shadowy, you're seeing a silhouette, a glimpse of something. Everyone has the worst camera in the world whenever they take a picture of a cryptid. So it was mostly about that, and about what would stick with people about this creature's silhouette. So with that, I thought, well, you look at some of the great character silhouettes of all time, and it's instantly recognizable. And I thought, well, with King Cryptid, I wanted, and I didn't know the name at the time, but I thought I wanted a cryptid that you would understand and recognize the silhouette immediately. And it would be something kind of ominous, but also not something that wasn't really necessarily frightening. And I figured something that had to do with the head shape, it'd be kind of like spiked, and then some kind of big, like not necessarily a cape at the time or wings or anything, but I thought that something like a big collar, and he's got a lot of size to him. He was a big guy, over 7 feet tall. And eventually, like, just drawing that out, then the word kind of came to me about King Cryptid, because just visually what he looks like is kind of, if you just saw the silhouette, he kind of looks like a king cryptid. Like, he looks like he's wearing a crown, and he's got like this big regal flowing cape thing. So the name eventually came to me, and I didn't know if I liked it or not. It just kind of, it felt like that was the first thing that popped in my head when I saw the drawing. And then after like a year or so, no real good name ever really came to me after that. And I figured I kind of still like the name. It sounds comic booky too, and it also sounds descriptive, like a real cryptid would be named this thing. And then it kind of just went from there. And a lot of it with the story creation process, and even with the character backstory too, a lot of it was kind of eerie, because there was so many things that I was thinking of about this character. Like every day I think about the character, and I have to almost purposefully at this point stop myself from thinking about the character or the story, because I come up with too many of them. But every day I'd be thinking about it, and it'd be like, he's 500 years old. Like, it would just be like these kind of like almost like these mental whispers coming in. It's very strange. And then certain his power set, and certain things that he looked like, and the region that he was in, and different events in his life, and all these different other things. And there's certain things I can't say right now because of the fact that they give away some pretty pivotal plot moments as well. But all these different things that every day would just be building up, and I would write them down and make notes of it. But then I would go and I would look this up to make sure I could actually do something feasible with this, and build a real kind of alternate history almost around this character. And there's so many things that correlated with all of these weird little whispers of, he's like this, and he's this old, and he looks like that, and this is what his history was like, and this is this other character. So that was really strange to kind of look up a bunch of things, do some research to see if I could ground things, and then I find that they're already based on real things, essentially.
Wow.
Brug the Swamp Monster, for instance. So I was trying to ground him in a swamp in a local area, and I was like, okay, I know what Brug is like. I know what he's going to be like. I know what he's composed of. I know the kind of place that he's going to be in. Let me see if there's a place in New England that's like that. And it turns out that there literally isn't. It's called Hockomock Swamp. And Hockomock Swamp means place where spirits dwell. It's Algonquin for that.
That's
and
awesome.
it's and looking up the history of that area, it's in the Bridgewater Triangle region. It's a paranormal region within Massachusetts. A lot of crazy stuff has happened there. Looking up a lot of that about the character, it was all this stuff that I already had written down about the character would be like this, existed in this place. This would be the history of the character, and it was very strange looking up that stuff. And it's almost like being in tune with whatever is around you. I don't know what it is. It makes me sound like a crazy person, but it's
No, no,
very,
that's cool, man. That's
yeah,
awesome.
it's very strange. I've never created a story that's quite like that. And there's so many characters in the King Cryptid series, a ton of which haven't been revealed yet. But there's so many of them that as I'm creating them, and I'm making sure to write down all the ideas that come to me. When I go in there to do research, to ground them in, to build them up a bit, I find that all that stuff is primarily already there. It's I'm making it up, but at the same time, someone would probably think I did a lot of research first, and then came up with ideas and characters. But it's the opposite. I came up with all these characters, and then I'm finding ways to try to build up their histories and make sure that they work in a tangible real world, because it does take place in New Hampshire, it takes place in the White Mountains, it takes place in New England. There's certain historical events that occur throughout the series that King Cryptid's kind of a part of, that kind of a thing. And so to ground it in that and find that all that stuff is essentially already there, it was kind of spooky. So I don't know any other way to put it, but yeah, it was very strange. It's like I'm a conduit for something in this
Right.
region that wants me to tell this story. I mean, for all I know, maybe King Cryptid is real. I have no idea.
Oh, that's awesome. It makes for very rich storytelling when it's grounded that well.
Yeah, yeah, and I feel like I feel strange sometimes about it, because it's not necessarily me even being super creative. It's more about I'm just getting this idea. I don't know from where. I don't know. It's just you're doing something. You're unpacking orders. I'm taking a shower. Whatever it is, ideas just pop in my head, and I'll write them down afterwards. And I've got a whole tons and tons and tons of ideas and characters and everything else. But story wise, that's why I tell people I'm ready to do at least over 100 issues or so of this series,
Yeah.
because there's already like 30 issues that are plotted out.
Wow.
So we had the first four on the campaign, but there's already like 30 issues plotted out. That every single year I'm ready to do 4 or 5. So then there's like 60 or so more that are ideas that are like a couple sentences for an issue or whatever. And I'm sure, and that's why I said I had to purposefully stop myself from thinking about the character, the stories, and things like that. Because the more I think about them, the more I write them down, the more I create them, the more
Right.
all of a sudden another idea comes in, and it's like,
Yeah.
what about this one? And then another character starts saying, "Oh, what about me? I want to play,"
Right.
So it starts getting really crazy. So I have to purposefully kind of no, it's not time to think about King Cryptid. I've got enough issues and stories to tell for like 25 years.
Wow.
I'm all set for now. So maybe next year I'll think about some more stories. But it's really crazy. I never had that experience making a series, and I can only really do it too because of the fact that we're not in Diamond. It's not a traditional distribution system we're a part of now. It's a direct to the reader. So being able to do it that way, I'm going to create these stories for as long as people want to read them. And I'm hoping that they want to read them for a very long time, because I got a lot of stories to tell. And a part of me is wondering if we just have like 20 readers at some point in time, am I still going to make these stories? And I'm like, if I have to be honest with myself, I'm probably going to say yes, because they just need to come out. Otherwise, I'm going to go crazy. It's kind of a compulsion
Yeah.
to tell this story at this point with these characters and this kind of a thing. So I'm super excited about it. I wish I was independently wealthy. I would just have a YouTube channel all day long and just talk about King Cryptid and just tell stories, and that would be that. I mean,
Yeah.
we would lose out on some great art. But that's the only thing keeping me back for the most part is being able to see the art and have it as a comic. Which I think it really benefits greatly from being told as a comic book, as opposed to a spoken story or a film or whatever else. Something about comics, it's a whole different world. And I think comic books, for the most part, it feels like so many of them have gotten away from the majesty of comic book storytelling, that you could tell a story with no budget, with limitless budget. The only budget is the imagination of the writer, the artist, and that's it. The sky's the limit.
Right.
And I feel like so many comics nowadays, because of the kind of adaptation to film, so many of them have become very grounded, to the point that a lot of the fantastical ideas, a lot of the creature designs, a lot of the powers, a lot of all of that have been very limited. It's constantly being scaled back. It's constantly, we don't want to see these characters or whatever that appear to be too larger than life, because then it feels like, well, how can anyone relate to that? And if anything, I love that. That's what drew me to comics and fantasy storytelling and all that stuff, is that they are so larger than life. It is something you could possibly never really see. It gets the imagination going, and it kind of it's still a great story. So you can have the story itself is something that you relate and kind of have as a metaphor or an allegorical way of telling story. But for some reason, people have been obsessed with the visual. The visual is the representative thing, as opposed to the story, the heart of it, whatever the character is below the superficial level. And I think that comics, storytelling, entertainment, a lot of that kind of stuff has really suffered greatly for focusing so much on the superficial and on the visual, as opposed to, well, what's the heart? What's the heart of the story? Because if anyone, if you love a certain character in comics, like I grew up, I really loved Spider-Man, I really loved Batman, and I love the way they look, they looked great, but what made me love them as characters and made me want like the toy or the comics or the shirt or watch the movie or the show, it was because of who they were. If they weren't the way that they were, if they didn't have the heart that they had, the character that they had, I wouldn't have been interested in it. I would have been like, oh, that's a cool character. It looks nice, and that would be that. It would be just very superficial. But it's because of all the character development, all the stuff, all the history, all the personality that they have, and all that kind of stuff. Because of that, why I was drawn to those characters. And I think, honestly, that's why everyone's drawn to certain characters. And honestly, I think that's why we're drawn to people. If it's all just the superficial and the visual, that's so shallow. I thought we were supposed to get away from that, from being shallow and everything is skin deep and all that kind of, it's about who you are. It's about what are you accomplishing, what are you doing, what is your purpose in life, what is your character like, that kind of stuff. It's like, you're sure you could look a certain way, you could present yourself a certain way and express yourself, but at the end of the day, if there's nothing past that, I mean, there's really nothing. So for us to, I think, as a society, see that our stories, our heroes, our everything has become so about the visual, about the surface, about what's on the outside, and that's what we're supposed to relate to. I think that's so wrong, and I think that's such a bad road to go down, to start thinking in that way. That we can only find representation based on what we see in ourselves, based on what someone else looks like. And if they don't look like us, there's no way I can relate to who they are. That's barbaric and archaic. So King Cryptid, that's another reason I was like, I don't want to tell a story with a human being. And that's, I think, a lot of reasons why children's authors tend to tell stories with animals. Because of the fact that it's an animal, it's not a person. So you have to actually focus on the personality. Sure, there's certain animals you're probably going to like. People like cats, dogs, horses, whatever it may be. But at the end of the day, it's really about their personality. It's not about a specific seeing yourself in that person, unless you're talking about the personality and the character and the things that they do and how they are as individuals, not just what they look like. And that's like what King Cryptid is. King Cryptid, his whole theme, he's a cursed immortal. He used to be human. He can't really remember his life as a human being. It's been so long. But he's just trying to do, I think, what we all try to do. He's just trying to make his own little corner of the world good. He's just trying to do good with the time he has. And as far as he's concerned, he thinks that he probably has limitless time. He hasn't died yet. He's 500 years old. And he could either use all that time and do something destructive, or he can use all that time and try to do something good. So where he's not a godlike being, even if he's immortal, he can't be everywhere all at once. He's not super powerful all the time, that kind of a thing. He has to mostly just concentrate on whatever he can do physically in that moment, at that time, in that space. And I think that's how we all feel. I think we all feel that way. We all feel like we're just trying to get by. We're all just trying to make the best out of everything. And if we all just tried to do that, I think the world would be a lot better. So King Cryptid he's trying to do that, and that's basically the theme of his adventures. Necessarily is that there's going to be characters he meets that they're foes but then become friends, characters that are friends become foes, characters that are friends that stay friends, characters that are enemies that stay enemies. Classic storytelling stuff. And then there's going to be a lot of different layers to the story in itself, where there's different shadowy groups, there's secret societies, there's black budget government projects taking place. There's all kinds of other layers of the paranormal, the unknown, conspiracies, cover-ups, all that stuff. So there's plenty for everyone to really enjoy with this series, and it's not just the latest issue of who is King Cryptid beaten to a bloody pulp.
Right.
There's a lot of action and things like that too, but there's a lot of heart there. There's a lot of character building, a lot of world building.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah. I seriously, I've talked about it a lot. I could talk about it. I mean, Erin could testify. She's probably sick to death of it. But I could talk about it for forever, and I could write these stories for forever, which I hope to do.
I hope you do too. What's your writing process like? When you sit down to write a script, what's that like?
Yeah, so it's really interesting on this one. So on the past, the chair, I wrote a very traditional script, and I was working with someone who was just starting out in comics. They were pretty good at what they were doing for the pencils, and I wanted loose, sketchy pencils because I wanted a certain charcoal-y kind of loose vibe to the chair. And I wrote a very traditional script. It was very, here's this panel, this character says this, zoom in, zoom out, splash page, yada yada, all that kind of,
Right.
let's get a tight shot here, let's focus on this character there. So it was kind of like giving instructions to the artist. And then I got a chance I was lettering and inking, so I got a little bit more room to play with the script later on when the art came back, and I could letter it. But with King Cryptid, what I did was, instead of having that kind of traditional script, I have it set up so it's basically I'm telling the story to the artist. So I go, well, here's page 1. Here's the story that is occurring on page 1. Here's page 2. Here's the story that's occurring on page 2. So this character it's very much just like reading, almost like Cliff Notes to any novel ever. So if you did a lot of that in high school to get through a book report,
Right.
my scripts would look like that. They would look just kind of like, okay, here's the gist of what occurs, here's what happens. It's not really about focusing on the dialogue. It's not really about focusing on saying that here's a caption, or here is a panel instruction, or here is the amount of panels, because a lot of scripts will say, there's 5 panels this page, and this is what happens in each. It was more about saying, this is the page, this is the story that you need to convey, and then the artist would convey that story. They could use 1, 2, 5, 6 panel, whatever it is that they thought that they could tell the story in the way that they thought visually would work the best. And then I go in there and retroactively script the
Okay.
dialogue, the captions, if need be, that kind of a thing, based on what the art was basically doing. So there's some pages where, maybe it was a full page, and then there's some pages where I'm writing like a paragraph, and some pages maybe I'm writing like 2 or 3 sentences. And the artists all enjoyed it. They all were saying how much freedom they felt. And you have to get really competent artists with a script like that. You can't get a new artist who's going to be really scared about being
Right.
confident with how to compose the page and put everything together. You have to get someone who's used to creating comics. So Christian Rossi on issue 1, Nick Hunter on issue 2, Kier Covington on 4, Alex Jovich on 3. These are all guys that have done such a tremendous job with making these issues, and they all loved it. They all loved the freedom of it. They all said how it kind of was interesting too for them, because they were setting the story up, but they didn't know what certain characters would say at certain moments. So when I was lettering a bunch of the preview pages for the campaign, they were really seeing these pages in full with the script, with the writing, with the characters actually coming to life. And it was an experience for them, and a surprise for them, which most artists don't really ever have. You kind of,
Yeah.
have to really work hard to convey what the writer is looking to convey. But in this, I thought, I'm hiring artists that are capable, that are talented. I want their vision. I want them to bring that story visually to life. Let me worry about putting in. There's going to be space to write and whatever. To me, it's a comic, so the art is the most important aspect.
Right.
It doesn't mean the writing is not important, but it's a visual medium.
Yep.
If a writer is like, no, my writing is absolutely important, the visuals, they're second. To hell with them. Just go write a novel.
Very true.
To me, yeah, I know there's always like this argument, right? They're both important, but you have to understand the art first and foremost. It's a visual medium. So I want the art to be the hero. I want that to be the main feature. I don't want my writing to clog up every little facet of empty space, because my writing, is I gotta have it there.
Right.
The ego. So I want to make sure that the art is really working well and has a nice balance, and that at the end of the day, if the artist is telling the story really well and I don't need to add anything to it because it would just be kind of superfluous at that point, then I don't add anything extra to it. And there's a couple of pages, a couple of panels that are like that. But then in the same spot, if the artist is kind of having a pacing thing that's going on here and there's some more room, I'll slow down the pacing so the reader doesn't fly through the issue, and I'll provide some backstory or something that juxtaposes what's occurring, maybe a thought that the character has, or a caption that provides some insight, or some kind of literary element explaining the situation a bit more, or providing some backstory on another character or something like that. So it's a fun way to do it. I can't at this point write comics a different way.
Yeah.
Writing it in a traditional script, I get bored to tears with it. And then I find that I'm just rewriting it anyway when the art comes back, because the artist is going to go in there, and if they're a good artist, they're going to still do what they want to do to tell the story the best way visually. So I'll put in all this time and effort and try to set it up, and then the artist is going to come in there and kind of do their own thing anyway. So what's the point? Let me just tell them the story and have them convey it visually, and then I go back in there and make the adjustments that I need to make. So it's far easier for me to do that than it is to tell the artist to bend to my will. I'd rather get the page back and then have fun with it. And it almost is like Mad Lib's style of making comic books, but it's really fun that way, and we've all seemed to enjoy it. So
That sounds like a lot of fun.
yeah, and what's really fun too is we have the script available on the campaign. So if someone wants to get issues 1 through 4 on the script, you could do that. See the exact same script that the artist got, and if there's an artist out there that wants to give it a shot and try to recreate a page or whatever based on it, and then size it up, how is yours close to the official, final one? You could see what my scripts would look like compared to dealing with like a traditional script that's telling you everything, and the character says this and this how many panels, and you have more creative freedom here, just setting up a scene, and then you get to actually just draw the scene out.
That's awesome, man.
That's a lot of fun.
Yeah. So what advice would you give a new up-and-coming writer?
Well, right. A lot of them don't do that. A lot of them will spend too much time kind of plotting and dreaming about what it is they're going to do, and you jot down the notes and this and that and whatever, and that's all great and that's all important. But just sit down, write that issue out, write that story down, write a character Bible if you have to, of create these backstories. That's really important, I find. It helps you set up character motivations so that you understand the character. And once you understand the character and what they're like, it's a lot easier to assign how they would behave in a certain situation, as opposed to if you're just kind of flying at the seat of your pants and you're making up the character as they go along. You're going to find you're going to be turning a lot of readers' stomachs, because people are going to say, but that doesn't make sense with what the character just previously did. And it's because of the fact that you don't have an understanding yet of what your character is like. So treat them like they're a real person, write almost like a fictional biography for them in some capacity, and their personality traits. Are they stubborn? Are they courageous? Are they frightened? Are they a coward? Are they strong? All these kinds of different things. Write what that would be, and that really helps you out to then define your character and then define your story. Then as far as writing plots and things like that goes, if you're struggling with writing plots, come up with certain situations in which it's a lot like that. You know, it's kind of similar in a way to like the Marvel method,
Yep.
with Stan and Jack and all those guys. And at that time, Stan was doing it because he had so many other books to write. But
Right.
honestly, we wouldn't have gotten anything as great as it could have been if it was very writer controlled. You need that artist to get in there, visually become imaginative, and really plot out some of the great stuff there with what's going to happen in the story. And then the writer can go back in there and tweak it as need be. So as far as writing out plots and things like that, once you know your characters, it's easy to give them plots. There's you can come up with a multitude of situations, a multitude of this character with that character, and just put them together, and then the stories almost start writing themselves. At least that's how it works for me, with King Cryptid in particular. So I'll have certain characters that I know their backstories, I know what they're going to be like. So then when they interact with another character, it's easy to just have them play out. And you almost feel then like a little kid, and you're kind of playing all over again, and you're coming up with a story. And then every now and then you throw in a twist, you throw in something to add layers to the story. If you get 3 or 4 characters in there, you make sure to build them up properly as well. They all have different plots coinciding. Pacing is very important. So I love old school pacing, for not just comics but also for film. And a lot of that is basically, I'll go back again. I'll go back to Batman 1989. So we follow Bruce Wayne's plot, then we follow the Joker's plot, and then we follow Batman's plot, then we follow the Joker's plot. And it's like you get this pacing where it's this back and forth kind of ping pong match that's occurring, and you're being kept up to speed with what's going on with each character as this story progresses until they come to a climax and they meet, and then now that's where they square off, and that's basically the plot. So I'm kind of a fan of that kind of storytelling style because it moves things along. You get a lot of information that's very important. Ghostbusters is great with that too. The '84 Ghostbusters, it's great with showing up. You know, here's this scene, important part of the scene. Here's this next scene, an important part of this scene. You know, and these characters, and that's it. No moment of film, no moment is wasted. Everything is very important, whether it's for the joke, an action shot, building suspense, and you have that pacing built in, as long as you manage to focus properly on that story and on what these characters are doing. So if your storytelling process is constantly, what are the characters doing in this scene, and what do I want the reader, what emotion am I trying to elicit from the reader with this panel, this page, whatever it may be. Because if you're not trying to elicit an emotion from the reader, they're not going to want to change that page. They're not going to turn that page. It's boring at that point. So if you've got a story where everyone is just, it's stagnant, the art doesn't change, there's nothing that's occurring, there's no suspension, there's no suspense being built, there's no tension between characters, the situation that's occurring, whatever it may be. If every single thing is kind of talking heads, or characters sitting around, or just a discussion that's occurring, and everything is stagnant, that's boring. You know,
Yeah.
you could have a conversation still, but you can change the camera angle. You can use every single moment effectively. You only get so many panels on a page. You only get so many pages in a book. And you should use every single one of them effectively, and they should all be important. None of them should be wasted. Every single bit of information that's being told should be vital to the story. If it's not vital to the story, it should be left out. And I think, again, we see a lot of that in a lot of modern comics nowadays, where it kind of feels like they're dragging a story out, or you'll see the same panel repeated like 6 or 7 times just because to them that's pacing. That's not pacing, though. That's horrible. So you know, you need pacing that's more effective in terms of being able to keep the reader engaged and keep them constantly up to speed with what's occurring in the story. Every single bit of information is important, and if it's not, again, get rid of it, get it out of there, and don't waste the reader's time, and certainly don't waste your poor artist. Like most writers will do this, but don't waste your poor artist's hands
Right.
and time crafting really boring pages and panels and everything just because you don't really understand how to have pacing properly in your story. You know, building up awkward tension isn't necessarily let's just copy and paste the panel, and then the last panel is like, the weird awkward joke.
Yeah.
That is such a strange modern storytelling technique. You know, back in the day, you would have had maybe one awkward silent panel of just like a expression of some kind,
Right.
and then the next panel would just be the punchline, whatever the joke is supposed to be, whatever it is. Not like the whole page. The first panel, someone says something awkward, copy paste the whole page, and then the last
12
panel.
panels. Yeah.
Oh goodness!
Yeah,
What
that's
horrible, horrible.
Yes. Completely agree.
Because if anything, you pick up any comic from I don't even know 60s, 70s, 80s, early 90s, mid 90s. You're not going to find what feels like a wasted piece of panel space information, whatever it may be. You'll sometimes find that there's too much information, that
Yeah.
there's too much going on a page. But you could never accuse a lot of those comics of being flat out boring and tedious and having this monotony to get a point across. It's I don't know. It's very strange nowadays. But King Cryptid, we don't do any of that. Everything is there. All of this stuff is to play out, to entertain the reader, to keep them informed with what's occurring with the characters, to use every last little moment we have to provide some insight into the event that's occurring, the situation, or to give you an insight into the character. There's thought bubbles. Comics got rid of that for the longest time, for the most part. We got thought balloons in there. We got captions as well that are third-party narration. So it's more of like a literary kind of device as well, to kind of beef up the scene, the script, kind of have this omniscient third-party narration that's occurring. All of that kind of stuff, it used to be so prevalent in comics, and it used to really give them this epic feeling. I don't know. So much of that is missing now, and I thought instead of just kind of complaining about how it's missing and wishing that it was around, I figured, for my book, when I get a chance to write it, I'm putting all that in there, and now I'm finally able to do that. So I'm putting my money where my mouth is.
There you go. Bringing comics back.
Exactly. Bring comics back to being comics.
That's right. Awesome. Oh, thanks, Pete. Is there anything else you wanna add?
No, I mean it was great getting to talk to you. If you have any other question for me, I'm happy to answer it. I hope I got to all of them, but I know I can
You did.
kind of talk. So
No, and I appreciate it because that's what we're here for. Here to ask you questions and get your information.
all right, well I appreciate it, Ben. Thank you so much. Yeah. And I want to let you know too, your package for the spring campaign has shipped out.
Awesome.
So it is in the mail. Yeah, I batch print a bunch of them and then I ship them, and it's shipped out. It's gone today, and it'll be to you sometime in the next week.
Sweet. I'm
so
excited
thank
to get
you,
that.
thank you
I'm
for your
excited
support,
King
man.
Cryptid.
Appreciate that.
The link is in the description, so if you guys want to go check out the campaign and get that, definitely do that. It looks like an awesome book, awesome artist. Love everything you're doing out there, Pete.
Oh, thank you, man. I appreciate it so much.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Catch you guys next time.